Snoqualmie Board of Commissioners Work Study Meeting. It is Wednesday, December 19, 2018, and it is about 6:04. And this meeting has been rescheduled from December 26th due to the holidays. Would you please join me for the flag salute?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have the roll call, please.
President Norris.
Here.
Vice President Herron.
Here.
Secretary Spikers.
Here.
Commissioner Young. Here. Commissioner Pollard.
Here.
May I have a motion to approve, for approval of the agenda?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll take it to a vote. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, there is none. Is there any public comment? Hearing none, we will move on. The topics of discussion. We have 4 here this evening. Understanding contractual reserves. Steve Daniel will do that, and then we'll move on to discussion regarding engagement of affiliation legal counsel, and then future work study focus areas, and then the LOI work update. So we'll start with number 1, understanding contractual reserves. Steve?
I want to spend a few minutes just talking about contractual reserves. You'll hear me say it a lot, and give you an understanding of what do we mean when we say that. We say contractual allowances. We also, being in the finance area, we also say contractual discounts, contractual reserves, accounts receivable allowances, and deductions from revenue. It all means the same thing. And the reason we confuse you with 4 or 5 different phrases is because we've just all grown up and used them interchangeably. So what it all means is we get paid less than we bill. So for a health insurance company, say Aetna or Primera or Blue Cross, we bill them what our charges are, and that's off a document called our charge master. You'll probably hear the word charge master too. That's a list of all that we charge. But they don't pay us what we bill. They pay us off of a payment schedule in the contract we have with Primera, Blue Cross, Aetna, and such, or they pay us a percent of billed charges, but it's all based on the contract we have with the payer. Medicare and Medicaid, they also pay us less than we bill for outpatient services. They have a schedule that they'll pay us. On the swing beds, they pay us actually less than we bill. We bill for swing beds and acute. We bill basically the cost of the room, the cost of the services we provide. What we get from Medicare and Medicaid for our inpatient is a daily rate. That's a rate per day that the patient is in the hospital. To make it even more confusing...
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Does that daily rate start at 12 a.m. at night, or does it?
It's a 24-hour schedule.
So it is
Yeah.
a 24 hours.
Yeah.
So as soon as you go into the next day, you're going to get paid some portion, if
Paid,
not all that
yeah,
day.
something else.
Okay.
Okay.
How does full cost reimbursement for the individuals?
We get paid our cost-based reimbursement through the daily rate. So what Medicare does is they figure, okay, our costs are X. We have a cost report. And we had so many inpatient days for Medicare. And they take our costs, as calculated on the cost report, it's a very complicated document, divided by the days, and that's our daily rate. But what is interesting is that daily rate changes. Because if our costs go down, daily rate goes down.
Are they adjusted annually or how often?
I'll get to that.
Okay.
Okay.
I got a question with this slide. Bet you didn't think you were gonna have this many questions.
Oh, no, I did, actually.
Okay.
It's kind of things we say that you probably have questions on.
Our reimbursement rate through health insurance companies, do we do this through the collaborative to try and get the best deal, or, because I don't think that's the best deal.
We belong to the collaborative, a group in the collaborative, and we are allowed as a public hospital district to do joint contract negotiations. And we do get a little bit more market power, so to speak, when we negotiate with the health insurance companies.
Does that offset what our costs are compared to some of the outlying critical access hospitals throughout the state? Because their costs are less than ours. They have less salary, less, it's just cheaper.
The insurance companies do not pay us based on cost. They pay us based
I
on
understand
the
that,
schedule.
but.
I'm not sure I'm understanding your question.
The lower, let's say a critical access in, Sunnyside,
Okay, let's say Sunnyside.
and, or somewhere else. And
Mhm.
their cost, because their salaries are a lot less, probably, or at least somewhat.
They're somewhat less.
Yeah, they're less, they're definitely a lot less.
Mhm.
It's because we live in the Puget Sound area, and we have to keep up with all the other competitive salaries from Overlake, Virginia Mason, and everything.
Mhm.
So our costs are higher. And because we're tagging along with this collaborative, is it really, really something that we need to do? Because maybe we're getting more power, but their cost reimbursement, don't they look at, well,
Okay, again,
because
they're
you're
not
critical
cost-based
access, we're only
reimbursed.
gonna give you so much, because
I-
the average costs are so much anyway.
You're asking for an opinion, I'll give you one. I think it is. We don't have, we get more expertise by joining with the 15 other collaborative hospitals. I can't know what Sunnyside is getting paid. That's a violation of antitrust laws. I can't know that, and we can't share, but we can do joint contract negotiation.
But it's public information, you have to be able to look it up, shouldn't you?
No, it's not a document we produce. So,
But they produce it and it's public information, is it not?
they're not a public entity.
Oh,
They
you're
produce it.
talking Sunnyside, yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
There are a lot of
neither,
private-
Well, let's say another,
Primera is not a public entity.
let's say another critical access hospital that's a public hospital district.
Mm-hmm.
We can know what they are paying and charging and so.
Gene, I'll be honest with you, I've never been asked that. If I was, I'd have to go to an attorney and have it researched.
Okay.
So-
okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna tell you honestly, I don't know that,
Yeah.
okay?
My whole point was,
I know what
should we
your
be
point
looking
is.
at, should we really be in this organization that has lesser costs and they are satisfied with their rates because their expenses aren't as good?
I will tell you, we talk, CFOs talk, no one is satisfied with their rates. There is continual pressure from insurance companies to decrease the rates. I mean, you know, they've got a profit motive they've got to do. So, no one is satisfied, none of us are satisfied with our rates.
Many of the commercial
You
contracts.
use the term
also-
collaborative.
Yes.
Oh, hold on a second, James, hold on, there's a comment.
Many of our commercial contracts are based on a percentage or a multiplier of Medicare. So that helps to
that
take
helps.
away the differences between the facilities of being on the east side of the state or the west side of the state, because it's
That's the-
using the reference point of Medicare. And the Medicare fee-for-service, the schedule, not what we get reimbursed. So that helps a lot too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
percent of Medicare is a big factor within percent of what Medicare would pay you.
I think
I'm
we
just
only
trying to
have-
figure out a way to get better reimbursement. That was
We
my
all
whole
are.
reason.
So that's
for these
the
commercial.
benefit of our participation in EHN, is because we get, whereas your contract is set, the EHN allows you to have quality performance scores and get shared savings out of it. And that's a great way to bump it up.
We're all looking for ways to get.
Well, there is going to be, my understanding is that there is some legislation, if I'm wrong, that allows even from nonprofits to obtain the costs kind of procedures now. It's both actually on the federal level. I think there's some legislation that they're going to try to put forward that obtain the cost from nonprofits so you can compare it. Because of the Obamacare has been ruled unconstitutional, so they're proposing that in lieu of that to be able to have more competitive.
I mean, I do know that we all have to publish our charge master at the beginning of the year. Now, that doesn't tell you what their true charges are, because again, we all pay based on payer contracts. But what we bill, that's gotta be public knowledge. By the end of the year, we've gotta publish it on our website. Ours is on our website.
Sure, but the nonprofits don't have to.
No, everybody does, David. Everybody does.
For all
hospitals do.
procedures?
Mm-hmm, yep. Every hospital in the country does. I saw something, there was some statement that critical access hospitals might be exempt, they're not. And we've published ours for this year, we will republish ours for next year, after January 1. So, every hospital does. Now, one of the interesting things is, if the public thinks I'm going to see the difference in what I will pay, they're not. It's the difference between what we bill, not what they will pay after their insurance is factored in and their portion of the charges are factored in. So we're trying as a society to get to transparency, and we've gone that far. We need to go a little further. But it's a step, and that type of thing will continue. So we will continue to have pressure to be more transparent in what our prices are, what we do, and what we charge for.
You've used the term collaborative several times. We're
Yeah.
talking about the Rural Health Collaborative?
The Washington Rural Healthcare Collaborative,
Okay,
of
now,
which we are a
Mr.
member.
Spikers may have a point just by the fact that these are mostly rural hospitals here, and therefore that doesn't include metropolitan type
Correct.
hospitals
Correct.
to help maybe raise the rate. Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
that's what I was trying to get at. Could we try to get a separate rate that's a little higher and to be more competitive with the surrounding
The
where we're
district
at?
with the area around us.
Mhm.
Yeah.
We do, but we're not very successful.
Do we report to the Healthcare Financing Administration? Is that where everybody has to send their rates and everything?
No, we have to publish it on our website,
Okay.
and we have published it on our website.
Okay, final question. How do DRGs fit into this?
DRGs are what a payer will pay you for a specific service. That's, so we say we charge $2,000 for something, and the DRG is $500, we'll get paid $500.
The DRG is set by the federal government?
But it only applies to
Yeah,
PPS
just
hospitals,
a-
not to critical access.
Not the critical access, applies to
So we're-
PBS. Yeah.
We're
Yeah, we're-
thankfully.
Used to be everybody was cost-based reimbursed, and then in the 80s, went away, and DRG came in.
Yeah, well, I had occasion a couple of years ago to call up University of Washington and ask an estimate for a procedure, and they were able to give it to me within a few minutes because it had to do with these DRGs, as
Yeah.
I understand
They can give you an estimate of what it'll be.
And we can do the same.
Yeah.
it. Thank you.
Oh, next.
Steve, can I throw one more thing in?
Sure.
Back to your question about, are we penalized by participating with the collaborative?
Yeah, that's basically.
Yeah, that
And
would be
actually, a lot of, the contracting is based on multipliers of Medicare, but the way you get leverage in those contracts is by gathering together a larger number of lives, covered lives. And that's one of the big benefits that we get by coming together with the collaborative, is we all get to add our lives together.
Mhm.
So before we were participants in the collaborative, we had such a small number of covered lives in our contracts, we had zero negotiating power. But then as we
Yeah, I
all come
realize that.
together,
I
we have
realize that.
negotiating
Yeah.
power. Yeah, and then that same thing happens when we negotiate contracts with EHN. So our sources of contracts come from both of those entities, just depends on which the contract is.
That's what I'm saying, market power. We have negotiating power to get better rates.
Would Overlake be able to obtain all of the R lines when if they were to affiliate with us?
Absolutely,
I would
depending on if the, how the.
pretty much bet
So that
yes.
would be a leverage, a positive thing for them
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm,
to have. I mean, now we've taken on another 10,000 or 30,000 lives or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
It's part of the attractions, the number of patients that we have in our outpatient clinics.
Well, I mean, as far as the number of lives from the entire collaborative as being part of the collaborative, would they become
Oh.
part of the collaborative?
No, they
No.
would, they have to join in and be a part of it, and that's hard to do.
That's
I don't know by law
They're not a rural.
It's not a rural health.
They're not, and they're not a public hospital district, so they would not be allowed.
They should find a way to get in.
That would be good. That would be good.
And they reject it.
Yeah.
You'd have to have a legislative change.
Yes, you would. Okay, here we go. We forecast contractuals. We look at, okay, what are health insurance company contracts, we look at payment history by payer, what percentage is paid, and then we do an estimated cost report periodically, 3 times a year to say, okay, what's our daily rate doing? So that's all done to say, okay, we want to get as accurate as we can on what our contractual reserves are, because that number has a big influence on what our bottom line is. It's a change in revenue.
Steve, can you define for forecasting the contractual discounts? What is a contractual discount?
That's basically, that's the difference between what we bill and what we will get paid.
So it's a difference between what it costs us to do it or
what we charge.
what we charge compared to what the Blue Cross will pay.
Right,
Regions.
right.
And
Yeah.
which insurance company is the most generous?
None of them.
Which, they're all, because
I
they're all
would
for
say-
profit.
What?
They're all for profit.
Well,
Yeah, I realize that.
Gee, I don't have enough knowledge to give you, I have an opinion, it would only be an opinion. I think Premier is pretty fair.
You think they're what?
Fair,
Fair?
for an insurance company,
Yeah.
they're pretty fair. Now, our controller
How about
calls
Kaiser? I'm just curious.
all insurance companies the evil empire, so.
I'm with him.
Yeah.
Because Kaiser is a enclosed entity,
That's-
we don't engage with them very much at all. They will occasionally give waivers for their participants to receive care usually in our outpatient rehab or our swing bed program. But those are those agreements are made one at a time as opposed to in large volumes. Because their organization, their design is to keep everything inside their walls.
Yeah, I'm a member of Kaiser
Oh, you want
as well as Premier.
Mhm.
But that's insurance I took out of retirement from the federal government.
Mhm.
It's gone through about 5 different names. It used to be KPS most recently, and then it became Group Health, and now Kaiser. And before that, there were 2 or 3 other names. It's been the same organization, and it comes out of my retirement plan.
Mhm. The most difficult thing to forecast in contractual discounts is Medicare, because that number moves based on our volume. As should I get this right? As your inpatient Medicare days go up, the daily rate you will get paid and ultimately settled for goes down. So as you have more inpatients, what you get paid for each Medicare inpatient goes down.
As you become more efficient also.
Yeah, but basically it is dividing costs over more patients, so your daily rate goes down. And that's the most difficult thing we have.
You know, we've gone down from about 3,400 to 3,000 or something like that.
Right now, the daily rate we're using is 2,600.
Oh, that is really low.
2,601, in fact.
We've adjusted, we keep adjusting.
We
Yeah,
keep
because
adjusting.
we were as high as, I think.
Oh, we were
4,000.
3,500, 3,500.
No,
So
we were 4,000 when we opened.
4,000?
Yeah.
Yeah.
the one I remember is about 3,520. And, we have increased our census, we have done work on expenses, so that's brought that down quite a bit to 2,601 is what we're using now. So,
That's interesting.
oversight. again, it's, the contractual allowances are one of the major things the auditors or CPAs look at. When they come in, they do their audit of our general ledger and verify all the transactions, and there's never a change. We then have a general ledger that the CPAs on the expense side have blessed. We then send it to our cost report prepared. That's kind of describing what's down at the bottom. The cost report prepared does the cost report. We get a final settlement number, and then the audit is issued, and then the audit's reported to the board. So really what has to happen is we need that cost report before we get a bottom line number. That cost report has to be completed by May 31st. So you might wonder, why do you get the audit reported to you in May or June? It's because we need that cost report done. And the last thing we do is we take a last deep dive, and we're always doing a deep dive into contractuals. What do we really think is going on? What's history? So anyway, but a lot of oversight. And that's in every hospital. It's one of the major things the auditors will look at is contractual allowances, because it is an estimate. It's the biggest estimate on any healthcare entity's books.
Who picks the auditors?
Well,
Is that a federal pick, or?
No.
I realize they're CPAs, but who picks them?
you guys really do.
Moss Adams.
Moss Adams.
Moss Adams.
Oh,
Moss
we're
Adams.
talking about our auditors?
Our auditors, yes.
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't
Our guys.
understand it.
Yeah, our guys. Yeah, Moss Adams, who, Eric, he presents to you every year.
I see, all right.
Yeah.
So when you say district auditors, that's our hospital districts?
Our hospital district CPA, they report to the board. They report to you guys.
Yeah.
So, this kind of last year, this is off of page 16 of the audit report you received. You don't have it, Gene. It's what you got when the auditors. We had billed revenue of 46 million. We had total deductions from revenue of 13 million. So that was contractual discounts of 10, provision for bad debts of 1.6 million, and charity care of 830,000. So there's a big difference. That contractual allowance is a big number. And that's why we look at it closely.
Do we use charity care as a way of getting paid for people who won't pay their bills or can't pay
No.
their bills?
We use charity care, and we give a discount to someone who qualifies due to their level of income. We encourage people to apply for charity care. And we have a policy in place, and we will give them a discount up to free care based on their level of income. Every hospital in the state is required to have a charity care policy. It's become very visible over the last 18 months. There was a public interest group, Columbia Legal Services, that actually did some snooping late last year. They called up hospitals and said they wanted to apply for charity care. And in some hospitals, not us, they were discouraged. And it made it difficult. We make it as easy as we can for people to apply for charity care. And every hospital. And we also had to give all of our charity care policies, procedures to a writer for the Seattle Times a few months ago. Nothing's come out of it yet, so maybe it wasn't the smoking gun you thought it was.
Don't we have a limit that we're required, up to a certain limit, we're required to provide charity care amount, and then once we hit that limit, we're not required to be further.
We have a sliding scale based on income. So yes, it is.
You're talking about the individual. I'm talking
Individual.
about altogether.
Mm-mm.
We have a limit
No.
on charity care.
No,
All right.
no,
So
we
our
don't.
quota perhaps would be better said.
But we don't have a quota, limit, or any type of fence or anything around it.
Isn't it based on need?
It's based on need.
I think what you're referring to, Jean, is there is kind of a test that says if you're really offering charity care, there's an expectation that about this some percent of your
No.
annual revenue will find itself in the charity care, and that's the test that they use to see if you're really participating or
Yeah,
not.
Astria or Sunnyside, pardon me, they had deficiencies in their charity care, and that was written up by
Right.
the state or the feds.
Right, and it
Yeah,
was
that's-
just using, and it's just using, it's kind of a screening test, it's not a requirement or a legislation. It's just a screening test that says if you're behaving like most hospitals, this is how much of your revenue will end up in charity care.
Yeah, and
Always
so,
we've always been between 6 and 8% for bad debt and charity care. This year looks like 7%,
Mhm.
2017.
yeah,
It's
so,
always been above, I think that test is like in a 4% range. I don't know, I don't remember exactly,
I
but it's.
don't
We've always
either,
been
but-
above it.
If you compare other hospitals around here, I'm sure that it's not 7%, probably a lot lower.
If there's no limit, at what point do you stop? Or
We don't stop.
whether we're making.
No,
and,
we don't stop. It's based on individual and analysis of the individual, their financial circumstances. We will award charity care if they meet our criteria, the criteria. There's no limit. We don't have a limit. So, and we shouldn't have a limit, to be honest.
Yeah, and so part of that, because we do believe that we need to be meeting the needs, but we do have wise business practices. So we do have processes in place that if someone is making zero effort to pay, then we, for example, in the clinics, if they're making zero effort to pay, then we will discontinue services to them. As opposed to the person who's making an effort. We have people who are paying maybe $5 or $10 a month. And that's not even gonna, they're not gonna be able to catch up with their debt, but the fact that they're putting forward the effort means everything.
We also, if someone comes in and they don't, like say they apply for charity care, maybe they're not signed up for Medicaid. We will help them sign up for Medicaid. We have someone called a financial counselor, that their job is to help people get a vehicle so they can have health care and pay for it. And, you know, if you have a vehicle where health care is paid for, you're more likely to take care of yourself in the future. It doesn't have just an impact on this visit. It has an impact on how you take care of yourself healthcare wise.
Now, the
We
district
encourage it.
had a special program that people could sign up for. It's been a couple of years since I saw this.
Yeah, that's why was my next question.
Pardon me, go ahead. Gene, I'm sorry.
Well, go ahead.
No,
You
I
know,
was gonna
you and
ask
I are
that.
thinking about the same
Yes,
thing.
yes, go ahead, I was gonna ask that.
And we urge people to sign up for this special program that the hospital
Like
has.
insurance, self-insurance?
Self-insurance or.
Yeah.
Affordable access.
Affordable, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Affordable access, yeah,
We still do.
Oh,
We still have that.
Okay.
So we encourage people to sign up for
Mhm.
that. I haven't seen any publicity on it lately.
How
It's-
many? Oh, I like
We have
this
some,
one.
we have some, I believe on our website and such.
Yeah, it's on
Yeah.
the
It's on the
website.
website.
It's on the
Okay.
website.
Yeah, yeah, it is. We do all we can to encourage people to get a vehicle where they can have healthcare. Because we all believe it's important.
You know, Mr. Pollock, you may also be remembering when the health exchange first came into being. And so we did
yeah.
provide a navigator for the first 2 years while that was still new territory for everyone. And we did a lot of publicity around that.
Yeah, we did. I
And we do
remember that.
continue to offer navigator services. We just don't have all of the marketing around it because everybody has figured it out now, the processes.
So the intake people know how to deal with that.
Yes,
Mhm.
yeah. And
Sign them up if it's a problem.
yeah, and we still have someone who's dedicated to helping someone sign up. So anybody in our system knows how to do
Okay.
those referrals.
Okay.
But, yeah, when the Affordable Care Act first came out, nobody knew about it, so people did need a lot of help,
Yeah.
because,
Okay.
Right.
you know, it's the government and.
Does this
The
just
site
covers
is really
basic services?
Which are you talking
Yeah,
about?
what are you talking about?
The one that we are offering.
Yeah.
Affordable access.
Affordable
Access.
access
Yeah.
is prepaid primary care. So it's only care in the clinics. And
Yes.
The way we describe it to patients and our staff also is if it's something that goes from start to finish inside the walls of the clinic, it's covered under affordable access. If they have to go outside the clinic to get it done, it's highly likely it's not covered. There's a few things that are. So if you have to go for an x-ray, it's not covered.
Are we only talking inpatient? What about?
Affordable access is all
Swing bed.
outpatient.
Outpatient.
Affordable
Okay,
access is.
Because we do have like a quota in the swing bed program for like 1 or 2 Medicaid people, as I understand it.
Mhm.
To
One,
manage those,
One
that
is
budget.
president.
Then if you recall, our inpatient is acute, and
Yeah.
swing bed, and acute is St. Paul County. So, that, I hope you found this somewhat enlightening, thank you. Any other
No,
questions?
really good, thank you for doing this, because I did mention it in the finance committee. I think it'd be a good thing to present to the rest of the board, because this comes up continually.
And it's hard to understand it, put it all together in one
Kind of like we're
package.
speaking Greek at times to you, and I
Yeah.
apologize for
And
that.
it comes out-
50 times over and over and over. I'm serious.
Well,
Yeah, no, that's
there's
true.
such a thing as finance speak, that nobody else can understand.
But I
No.
think it's just finance speak, I think it's also some of the ways that we as a critical access even work, isn't it? It's some of it's unique to us,
Mhm.
or the type of hospital we have.
All right, thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Steve.
sir. Oh,
One
that's
other
terrible.
thing that's worth-
Who's here?
One other thing that's worth bringing up is this concept of you always want to set your prices well above what you anticipate getting paid, because if you price it below what one of your contracts say, they're not going to pay you any more than you billed
Right.
for.
Yeah.
So you always have this practice of billing higher so that you'll definitely capture every penny on the table, but it positions you to always be generating bills far more than you're actually going to get paid. Not just the need to
It's
keep reality.
an extremely interesting system and how it's evolved over the years, you know, it really is.
So number 2, are we done with this discussion?
We are.
Okay. Everybody's got their 2 cents in. Discussion regarding engagement of affiliation. Legal counsel. Is our legal counsel, Mr. Hauser, going to help us with this?
I can assist. I think Dr. Whitcott's well prepared and versed
Are
in
you
this
going
as
to do
well,
this?
but I'm happy to
Okay.
help.
It didn't have a name next to it.
Sorry,
It's okay.
it's group effort. So at the last board meeting, we had Brian Bauer come and do his presentation to the group, and just as a reminder, we got to him based on recommendations and having an idea of what we actually needed, somebody who had experience. So brought him in after we'd already weeded out a lot of other names and folks. But now, what do you think, what did you think about that presentation? Do you have a comfort level with moving forward? Do you have a request for others? Was there something about his presentation?
I have
his
a comment.
proposal? Yeah.
I think it'd be good to, I specifically did ask him about, let me see, I want to go back to the exact words, but I just remember. I asked him what the differences are, because he didn't have a lot of experience here in Washington, really none with affiliation. And so I said, so tell me what the differences are from the Midwest to,
Northwest.
Washington. And he didn't answer it. What he said was, well, in my presentation, in the Midwest, there's a lot more of the activity there than Washington. Well, yeah, I know that. So what's the difference? He never answered it.
Yeah,
That was a problem I had with that.
Mr. Spiker, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I heard you ask him was, give us an example of a Western Washington hospital where you have been involved with an affiliation, merger, sale, proper effort,
And he
and
didn't have
he
it.
did not have a single one to give us.
He did not, and that's not to say that he can't do a good job. He didn't answer my question. Okay? And that, to me, seems a little deceptive in his presentation. And when somebody doesn't want to answer a question, and he doesn't have the background or he doesn't have the knowledge, he's walking into this area completely clueless, I think. And that's the problem I have on this. He's walking this area into players that we're going to be playing with clueless. And that's not how I would want an affiliation person one that's gonna give us advice on this to have that background. And that's my problem with it.
So how many have you, before we eliminated the rest of the other?
We did a lot of what are we looking for and found a match for the what are we looking for, as opposed to doing a big RFP process and having to go through the weeding out.
Right.
So that's why I wanted to bring it to a work study for a conversation,
Yeah.
because there's so many different ways that we can approach it. I wanted to hit your comfort level.
Isn't there some other attorneys in this area that do this, that have worked on some of these affiliations?
Well, I think we had a presentation from Brad Berg, but he's really expensive.
No,
And
I
he
already
talked
know
about a
that.
variety of
It's
things.
double what everybody
Yeah,
else
it's not-
does.
He
Yeah,
just
yeah.
bond.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree there.
There haven't been that many mergers in the state of Washington with larger facilities and rurals. I think that's part of what we're almost setting the, blazing the trail.
Well,
Skip, you had an opportunity to talk with
Sure.
him more than any of us did offline.
Right, I spoke with him offline, but also spoke with him for about a couple-hour meeting with Steve and your former CEO, Tom Parker. And I have all my notes from that, and going through that meeting and asking him a fair number of questions. And I'm not going to speak on his behalf, and I think you should follow up or have Dr. Whitcott follow up, because I don't think he took the opportunity to fully answer your question. He's very precise in his thinking, and so if you ask a very precise question, you get a very precise answer. I think that's how he operates. So when he said, have you ever done an affiliation in Western Washington, he has not done one from start to end. But he has worked on affiliation issues with Evergreen Health, Peace Health, Snoqualmie County Public Hospital District No. 1, the Washington Rural Health Collaborative, and most recently, Klickitat Valley Health. That's also one of my clients, and he worked with them to look at an affiliation and would that work for them or not. So he has a great base of knowledge in terms of how affiliations work, and he's done lots of affiliations. But to answer your question precisely, has he done one in Western Washington? He has not. But he's reviewed those, and in fact, he looked at one to try and undo one, and walked you through that. I think he answered that question. And then Klickitat Valley, he's looking at seeing whether they want to affiliate at some point or not. So to further answer your question in terms of his background and experience, we were talking to him kind of precursor to if you wanted to do affiliation. And he was walking through all the questions that you would ask. And I was saying to myself, I wish we would have had him when we were dealing with Astria. We might not have gone down that road if we knew the right questions to ask. So he seemed to have a great deal of knowledge in that area. The other thing I found quite appealing by him is he can give you a not to exceed cost. And that's a little unusual in the legal
That impressed
system.
me.
To put out there, this is not to exceed.
Yeah, he was transparent.
I would
about it.
feel uncomfortable as an attorney, as probably Mr. Spikers would, where sometimes you don't know what it's going to
Depending
cost.
on the case, it can be something that,
And so he's willing to put his firm is a very well-respected firm. It's a very large firm. He has assisted the collaborative, the Washington Rural Health Collaborative as well, in a number of areas, and assisting them working with other states. So he's got a broad base, I think, to draw from. So that was, I think, impressive for him to identify not to exceed amounts, as well as where he thought he was going to estimate certain needs. I thought his estimates were probably a little bit high. I think he would come under that amount, but again, that's just my opinion, and you never know for certain. So that was kind of my read on him, and also my read in meeting with him as to understanding rural public hospitals. You may not have picked up on it, but that really is his passion. There are certain people that like to work in certain areas, and that is his niche. That's where he likes to spend his time and his energy and his passion. And it's not in these large, hospital conglomerates that you might see otherwise. So anyway, that was kind of my impression. But I think specifically, you probably would want to put those questions back to him and ask him for a short response and say, these are some questions that came up after your presentation, and how do you further respond to, if you haven't done one from start to finish in Western Washington, what can you tell us, what you've learned in other areas, I think was your question.
Yeah,
And I
basically,
think
Although he
what's the
asked-
difference? What's the difference that you
Yeah, and I think you didn't get to that, and I think
Although he
given the
answered-
opportunity, he could answer that question.
Yeah, although he answered that he, because I did ask the question, have you had an art, you know, that you were able to finalize or close, any closure on it? And he said, well, it's not in Washington State, I remember
Michigan,
somewhere,
yeah.
in Michigan or something. So he did, so overall, I see his experience and skills in the rural areas, very, you know, very impressive at least. Although compelling, but the local side of it, meaning our, you know, that's something that he may have to really get to know more about who we are and what. So overall, and his, you know, his fee seems to be, you know, reasonable, and he was very transparent about it, because I think I asked him some difficult questions in some ways, and he was able to, you know, give me the response that I was looking
Commissioner
for.
Pollard, did you have something you wanted to say?
Well, I'm just trying to put all this together because Cave Hoopner told us that it was going to cost a total of $140,000 or $145,000. And of that, $70,000 would go to Cave and Hoopner, and the other $70,000 would be for the attorney that would finish the deal. And now we're up to $200,000 as a budgeted amount. I don't understand that.
I think that they actually quoted 92,000 to begin with, and then
I
there was
don't-
another
The
100,000.
Hubner and Cave,
Yeah, I think there was another
It was
100,000.
140 something
is that
thousand.
what we end up paying?
That's what they told us, and half, about 70,000 was going to Cave Filter, and the rest of it was gonna go to the attorney, and it totaled to about 145,000. So that's why I'm a little puzzled.
That was different figures.
But do you
It's
know
on.
what we actually paid, that we came to, do you have any recollection?
No, I'd have to go back and pull those
I don't.
files.
I guess, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, but you want to work with someone that's going to finish the deal and get it done. And somebody that has that experience. So I had my reservations, and I'm not going to go through my reservations on the last, I'm not going to call it a fiasco, but I'll just say I had
Challenge. How about a
reservations
challenge?
from the beginning. So,
Some of us
if
think
I
fiasco.
could get a question out to him to say, what do you foresee in differences in processes in the affiliation process here versus the affiliation process in Minnesota? Maybe I should have been a little more specific, but I thought he would understand what I was talking about. What's the differences in affiliation? When I said, what's the differences in affiliation in Minnesota versus here? All I could say was, well, there's a lot more of it going on. So that to me wasn't very.
Didn't be the detail you wanted.
No.
You're at a disadvantage of not being able to see your face to know if he was on track with your question or not, too.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So that's why I'm thinking if I could get that question answered, if he could.
Do you want me to pose it to him specifically for Minnesota or for Midwest
For the
states?
Midwest area,
Midwest states
Iowa,
versus-
Minnesota, Wisconsin, that area, and Illinois, I think he does all of them.
Shouldn't we present questions from the entire board at the same time?
That's why I thought it would be good to have this
So that's
conversation.
fine.
Do you have questions to add?
Well, I have a legal question, and that is, I'm flabbergasted at the cost involved. And I wonder if there isn't a legal requirement when you're talking about services at this level to do an RFP. And we apparently did not do an RFP.
We did not do a formal RFP.
And Skip, you only spoke with one candidate, and that's this fellow.
Yes, and I don't think that there is, and I will look into that for you, Commissioner Pollard. I don't think there's a requirement for legal services to go to an RFP. For instance, I provide you general legal counsel, and there's no requirement for you to go out to an RFP. I don't think they're required for.
No, but I think at a certain level.
I think it depends on the type of service you receive, and I don't think there's, irrespective of the level of the amount, if it's for legal services, it's not required to go to an RFP. And I think it's engineering and maybe some architectural, certain categories that are not required, but I'm going to
Could
confirm
you
that
check
for you.
on that? Thank
Absolutely.
you.
I'll check on that. So the RFP was not required. the issue there, in terms of whether you want to do an RFP or not, you obviously can do one. There's some costs involved in that. There's a certain degree, a significant amount of time involved in that, and just putting together an RFP and then going through the process, you know what that's like. You've been through those before.
I
So
don't want to
there's
reinvent the wheel.
certain disadvantages of that. The other question that I recall someone asked was, well, how successful have you been when you do these affiliations? And as you'll recall, his answer was almost every single time, unless the parties decide that they don't want to. He says, from start to end, we're successful every time
That's what I liked.
if the parties want. And I just recall that when I thought it would be a much lower percentage on top of maybe it fails a good percentage of the time. He said, no, if the parties are engaged, and it's almost a certainty that they'll get through this.
Well, and we're already engaged, which does give us an advantage then if we were
Yes.
to use him.
Clearly, even when we met the first time, Steve and I and Tom Parker, he gave us a presentation that was a little bit different than this, because he was taking us all the way back from the beginning, and that is to go look for potential affiliate partners and all these other steps that he typically has to do. He would not have to do it in this case. He's already further ahead.
But when he gave us his numbers, it should have eliminated those because
He
that
did.
was not part of it.
He did. For instance, he doesn't have to do an NDA, he didn't have to go look, and so his numbers are reduced down from that. Those are not included in his budget.
I think what Commissioner Pollard was saying, he didn't explain that they were low and why they were low. Is that what you're saying?
Well, actually, I think someone said something about, well, there haven't been that many affiliations. Actually, there have been. For example, Evergreen took over Valley of Monroe.
Monroe, yeah.
I'd like to know, he throws out,
That's one.
he throws out.
He was involved in that one.
He throws out the name Evergreen. I'd like to know from Evergreen, was this guy involved? To what extent was he involved? What kind of a job he did? It may be that he's just thrown out their name and did very little work for them. I don't know. But you know, when somebody applies for a job, they give references. And to do due diligence, you need to check on those references.
So that's the part we haven't brought out yet, and I've been looking for an opportunity to throw that in. So of those names that he gave us of work that he's done, we know well 2 of the CEOs of those facilities who have been able to give us very shining references for him. They had no issues.
Which organization?
Clickitat, so that's in Goldendale, and then the Snoqualmie side of the Evergreen.
So Monroe.
So Monroe.
Monroe.
Yeah.
So the Monroe side of the Evergreen Monroe deal.
So he was involved in the merger with Monroe?
He was involved, he came in in what they call phase 2. So he didn't do the beginning deal. He's come in to try and help them kind of clean it up and figure out how to move forward through it, because it's got some clunky parts to it.
Well,
There's
and
like
one of
2
the
counties.
biggest mergers in the state was the merger of Virginia Mason and Yakima Valley. And now it's not even called Yakima Valley Community Hospital anymore. It's called Yakima Memorial.
Yeah.
And it's a 350-bed hospital. And I'd like to know, who did they work with? That's a very successful merger.
We have to find that out, and those were,
That'll be pretty pricey.
yeah, we were
I would think
Bigger hospital.
bigger hospital
Yeah.
with demand.
unknown, that would be a presumption, so unknown. But again, the attraction for Brian was his rural passion. That was nice, that all of his experience is based from a rural perspective.
Yeah, that's right.
You guys were thrown out as Cave Hubner, so I kind of looked back at the agreement and pulled it up. Cave Hubner quoted 58,000, but it was to get to the point we are now, where we've spent nothing. So, what you've got is, I think I deserve a raise. Is the staff has taken what Cave Hubner was going to do and got you to the point where they were going to say, it's not going to cost you more, and you got to bring your legal counsel, and they were going to charge you $58,000.
$58,000 for what now?
Getting to a letter of intent, where we are right now. I just looked. I've got their document.
And remember their estimate for the balance of the effort
They,
was 141,000 total.
that I don't know, but they were throwing out numbers. and that did not include legal. They would always say,
No, that was, that is, the $70,000 on top of their $70,000 was for the legal. That would all be a total cost situation.
I would have to
I
disagree.
think I may have the papers on
Okay,
it.
I kind of disagree with there, but one of us is probably not right,
Yeah, there is something in writing from them to that effect.
and they would be very squirrely, as I remember, on the
Police contract?
To
So-
know what the contract was, I thought it was 95,000.
What was it?
I thought it was 95,000, but
Okay, 58,
the total contract
Even
getting,
you.
not to exceed 70, but that was to get us to where we are now, so, anyway.
Yeah, we probably ended up,
another
we
100,000.
ended up paying them 58, is that what you're saying?
No, that's what their quote was, I don't remember what we paid them.
I think we paid them around 70.
I don't
No,
remember.
we're around 50,
I think that sounds a little bit
if I recall.
close.
I think I
Anyway.
added them all up.
So I have one question written down to pose to Brian. Are there more questions?
Well, you know, I guess I was a little disconcerted that this proposal was in the form of a sort of marketing brochure as opposed to a letter proposal.
I have a letter proposal.
I'd like to see that.
That was not intended to be his engagement letter. He prefaced that. He said, this is not my letter of engagement, it's to give you background on what we do and how we do it.
He couldn't give us a letter of engagement at that point. He was just trying to get our business.
I was thinking of a letter of proposal rather than a letter of engagement.
Do you want to?
Commissioner Pollard.
No, I can make copies if you want to take that, or I can send it to you by email.
So anyway, that's my question. I think that would be helpful if we could get a response to that. And, but that's the only thing I had a question about. I thought everything else was fair. It's $400 an hour. I mean, you can
thought that was
add the
really
hours
fair.
to make up for the $400 an hour, but I think we could probably go through, I'm sure Steve would go through it and find out if it's, unreasonable or not. So-
And yeah, that's not bad for that type of service.
No.
It's not
Could I
bad.
have a copy of that at some
Do you want me
point?
to send it to you by email? Or
That'd be fine.
you can keep that.
I'd like it emailed, so I can, my stuff.
And this is all, right, this time, this information is private or confidential at this point?
That LOI is,
This
This
is
is
work
not-
product
This
at
is
this
work
point,
product.
or what's
Well, that's
called
what
I
the
thought.
deliberative process. At this point, you haven't made any decisions on the LOI, and these are all discussions that are leading up to that. Once you take a vote on the LOI, or you take a vote on this engagement letter, then that becomes public document. But at this point, it's just discussion, work product, or what we call deliberative process.
Meaning public information.
It
No,
is
not
not
work
public
product,
information.
non-public.
It is work product, it is deliberative process, it's discussion, it's draft. All this is draft discussion right now, with the exception of his proposal that he presented on a PowerPoint. That was public.
Okay, when we were dealing the first time with Overlake, and we met in Chelan in about June of 2014. No, it was actually in about March. The board finally saw the LOI that had been signed by the superintendent, and it was public information.
Well, then it's because you have a signed document. And I can't speak to that because I obviously wasn't there and don't know the history of it, but once you have a signed LOI, yes, it's a public document.
But it had been signed only by the CEO and
Well,
not
that's-
by the board.
That's unusual, is all I can say, that you would normally have board approval before you enter into an LOI. And I don't-
Yes, and that caused some real friction.
I understood, and I
So-
can't speak to that.
So just to clarify I know we're jumping ahead of the agenda, but the LOI right now that we have in hand, it's a draft, so it's not finished yet. It's constructed to behave in the same way, but only what you're bringing, Mr. Pollard, which is that this board will authorize the signing of it. But it won't have 5 signatures, but exactly what Skip was saying is, there will be real clarity, nothing will happen if this board doesn't.
Does the public at any point get to know the contents of the LOI before the board considers it?
Not unless you choose to disclose that, and you could, but I would caution you not to, because it's all discussion. An LOI should not be disclosed to the public until you got the opportunity to fully vet it, review it, negotiate it, discuss it,
And sign
And
it.
then
and sign it.
non-disclosure.
Once it's signed, then you provide it.
Well, once it's signed, it's a done deal, and the public has no input as to whether it's a good thing or
Well,
not.
with all due respect, Commissioner Pollard, you are the public. You represent the public, you represent their interests, you represent what you believe is most important and critical to go into that LOI. And in some cases, if you open that to the public, you put your potential suitor at risk because you're disclosing a lot of information at that point that they would not want to have disclosed.
And don't we, if I recall, whenever we're doing real estate or any of those kinds of things, go in executive sessions?
That's
Those-
correct. But this
Price
is
of
not-
real estate can go into.
This is
executive
not
session.
an item that we can go into executive session under the rules of executive session.
That is true.
Until the point that if there's any transfer of property or anything like that,
Oh.
correct? Then we would-
Property is a separate issue, and it's always suited for the executive session.
That's true too. Absolutely.
It's kind of different.
Yeah, real estate's a little bit.
Well, it depends too on what the collaborative looks like at the end, whether they do want property or whether we're willing to give, I mean, all those things are part of it.
My understanding was that property was not going to be part of the consideration, but it could be, you're right. And I think the first time
Please.
around it was, and that was one of the objections of the public, is they were going to take over our property.
Parcel E, I don't
You
know.
talk about the,
I don't want to get into that, but are there, let's go further. I want to end this part of it. Do we have any more questions for? Yeah.
I think a general question that Dr. Whitcock and I can work on is, I sense that the board would just like a little more specificity on how he would approach this
Manage
here
the project.
in Washington, because he talked about how successful he's been in other states. So I think that question lends that, but again, because I think he wants to answer it as precisely as he can. I think we need to give him some room to say, in more in general terms, tell us, how are you going to approach an affiliation with this organization and Overlake?
And where have you been successful doing that wherever?
Yes.
I'd like to see actual
So
cases.
if he can maybe relate that or somehow correlate that to where he did a similar type approach.
Especially a critical access plus a large nonprofit, which is really what we have.
And so I think we ask him, what correlations can you draw from what you've done to help the board understand how you would assimilate it and process it and adapt it to this approach? I think really give him a pretty big window to answer within. I think that will help him.
I thought Mr. Spiker's question was very right on, and I was about to ask a similar question, not as well as Mr. Spiker, of course. But what I saw, it was that totally deflated him. Did you notice how he walked out of the room, head down, and
I think he was surprised, I felt like he was surprised and a little discouraged at how it went.
Yeah.
So, I don't know the rationale, I did not talk to him afterwards, and it's easy to jump to conclusions.
It's subjective.
Yeah, so even though I thought that, I didn't get emotionally involved with it.
Okay, do you have enough to begin working on, and maybe if we have any other thoughts, we can get back to you.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
this
rest
will
I like,
position you all to.
the rest I
Yeah.
liked, so, I mean, you know, it's just that there was that hitch that I feel needed to be a little better explained.
okay.
Yeah, because if we need to take a different path, I don't want it to be February or March.
No, I
changing
want-
our
I want-
path is,
Can we
Yeah.
have that before we go to the next,
a response from you?
yeah, right
Sure.
away? Yeah.
Yeah.
I would like to get going on this, I don't want to,
Yeah.
either we're gonna do it or not.
Right now, right now we have nice lead time. If we change our route, now we're scrambling
Yeah,
a bit.
no, I agree, I want to go forward as quickly as possible, I've been trying to do that for 3 years. Get people together on this.
Okay, are we done with this discussion?
Item
Moving
2.
forward,
Yeah.
pardon? All right.
So we finished item 2, we're moving to item 3. so-
That's correct,
Okay.
future work study focus areas.
And this is really just an open question for you all as we move into 2019, as we move into a year of affiliation. do you have from some very specific ways that you want to use the work study? We've been using them through 2018, really as times to kind of offer more in-depth discussion about the business operations of the hospital, or the educational presentation that Steve gave tonight, and that's always on offer. But do you have some particular ways that you would like to use the work study? I feel like we're going to be having decisions at the board meetings that probably deserve some talk time,
Sure.
preparation time ahead.
I myself, when something comes up that I think the board should know, I usually tell Steve and finance to bring it to the board,
Yes.
either in a work study or that. So that's where I usually come up with ideas, but they don't come up like me ahead of time. I don't think about these ideas until they come up in
Yeah.
Yeah.
the finance
Do
meeting.
you also used to send memos around about interesting developments in the healthcare industry?
Oh, yeah. I apologize, I haven't, that's why I brought that up today about, I thought there was something in the legislature, did anybody else hear about it, that they wanted to make nonprofits more transparent, so that people could look at.
So that'd be something we might want to look at,
Sure.
does that exist? Yeah.
And that's exactly part of my question is how do you all feel like work studies can be of greatest value? And if it's partly that we reserve time just for things to get thrown out that says, at the next work study, can we cover this? And we just carve out 15 or 20 minutes to deal with that question.
I
I'm
think,
completely on board with
I
that.
think they should come from the committees. I think when something comes up in the medical
That's a good
committee
idea.
that is important, that's, or facilities or wherever, I think that should come, maybe something that we need to think about as a whole.
But not only from the committees.
No.
Any commissioner.
I think that there should be, that would be helpful if we had questions.
And before we move on, I hope everybody knows that the thing about the elevator, initially, we thought that we were gonna have to pay because we thought it was water.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out it's not water,
Yeah, you
it's
mentioned that last time.
oil. Okay, so I wanna make sure everybody knows
Yep.
that we don't
They
have to pay for
Came in
that.
the last second of the board. She had a text or something.
Well, could I make a comment? And that is, I get so many mailings from Becker's and Fierce Health and these professional organizations, especially Becker's, and I can spend 20 hours a week just reading the material coming from Becker's. And there are so many interesting topics. I would hope that, not necessarily, I suppose each one of us could look and see what interests us, but could there be some kind of a central screening of things that you think might be helpful to the board as a whole? The healthcare scene is changing daily, and we have to stay up to it, or we're going to be left behind.
I went to Becker's in November, I think that's when it was, I don't know, but I went to Becker's, and it was interesting to me to see how they did things, and it seemed also to me that the general drive is towards single payer, and that's what everybody is really talking about, really seems to want, is what is single payer, and I don't know what all the implications of that are, I don't know what that means financially to us and to other entities, but that was the theme. And as soon as somebody said something about single payer, you'd hear all these ahas and yeses, and so I think that's something that we could at least start with, and that comes out of Becker's.
Yeah, it's going to be mainly decided at the federal level, although California, I think, is trying to do some kind of single payer, maybe other states as well. Jay Ensley is very much in favor of single payer. And so maybe Steve knows something about single payer in the legislature. I can offer an interesting thing that developed in the legislature, and it has to do with Primera. And that is that Primera had a system whereby any billings for OT, PT, and massage therapy is not handled by Primera, but is handled by a contract organization called Evercore. And what it meant was that you could have about 2 massage therapies or OTs or PTs before the provider had to give a report about progress made in any further treatments authorized. And the state legislature changed that and said, you have to provide at least 5 before you ask for that. And that's a recent development, because I had a clinic therapist who said they weren't going to work with Premier anymore because of that requirement. But now it has loosened up in just the last few months, and that therapist will work with Premier. So that's a little thing in terms of what's developing.
That was all in one of the Becker's reports.
Yeah, well, I'm talking about that's a local experience in this state.
Okay, so this is helpful for me to hear what
Yeah.
would be willing, your time will be valuable. AWPHD has also constructed a curriculum that's intended for commissioners, and they are rolling it out this next year. I've got a question out to them, and they haven't gotten back to me yet, just with some details. I have the list of topics, but what is the expected, is it 15 minutes, is it 20 minutes, is it
I see.
one a month?
You mean the educational portion of the work-study session?
Yeah, AWPHD is producing this curriculum, and it's, in the end, it's supposed to be online, kind of a library online that you can select what you want to watch. And so it's it's presentation style, with a video or at least a webinar, a recorded webinar, so PowerPoint slide with voice over the top of it.
I think 15 minutes would be helpful, on a.
Right.
Yeah.
It'll be hard to work on if it's their 1 hour presentation,
Yeah.
now it consumes your whole work study. So I'm waiting for those answers to come back and what their plans are.
Also, AWPHD has produced a AWPHD legal manual, and that we could go through portions of that as an educational experience at work-study sessions. And all you have to do is put in the AWPHD legal manual, and you'd be surprised how interesting that is. It's about 60 pages long, I think, or so.
Much longer.
Yeah,
Longer,
portions
yes.
of that have been incorporated into the curriculum.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, all right.
Yeah, and they've also brought in subject matter experts from across the state and the nation to do it. The University of Washington Masters in Public Health, or Masters of Healthcare Administration program, so a lot of those professors have been participants in putting this
Jay
material
Rodney
together.
got his master's degree in that
He
program.
did, yes, and so some of those professors.
Well, whatever we decide is not locked in stone. We're gonna learn by doing. So just getting it started with an approach, and we can critique
Totally
that.
fine. That's what I wanted to hear from you, so that as we start planning month after month, where it's advised. But you've absolutely answered my question. And so slip in compliance, slip in some quality, what have you.
All right.
Okay, we're gonna move on to the LOL.
So the LOI update, just to keep it fresh, there's not been any changes to the document moving forward. I have a meeting later this week, I think on Friday. I have a phone call with Michael Marsh as an overlay. Where they are right now is really needing to get to a point of confidence in how the rural designation occurs. So we all live in this world, but they are really needing to understand how is it that a rural designation occurs, and how is it that a rural designation continues to be upheld.
And that's an interesting discussion, but it's actually an RCW. There's a law that says exactly how you define rural. And it's like 75,000 or something. I looked it up
50,000.
once.
You have.
Right?
You
No
don't,
city greater than 50,000 within your rural public
Right.
hospital.
no,
This
if you
is-
have no city that's 75,000 or more, that's a rural area.
So this is very specific to how does CMS recognize you as being rural.
Exactly.
Because
And
it's
we
CMS.
could not merge under law with another public hospital district with the kind of debt we have, because one hospital district is not able to take over the debt of another hospital. But that leads me to the question, we have a for-profit, nonprofit overlay, and I have yet to see any kind of capital investment or promise or anything other than that they're gonna backstop us to make sure we can pay our bills. I wanna see some capital investment.
We just haven't gotten that far.
We're working on the lease, I think that's something that we'll work out as we go into the contract, but, this really is gonna be under a lease operating agreement, and so they'll be the ones who then do the investment as they identify what the market assessments are and the market needs. That's something that is right there in the midst of the LOI, is a mandate that in the first year, market assessment or community assessment is done so that there's clarity about what the needs
And
are.
by the way, don't lose that thought, we need to do our community assessment ourselves, do we not under the ACA?
As a hospital district,
Yes.
we're currently in compliance.
Well, but one is due now, a new one, it has to be done every 2 years.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so the hope is, as they fill through the affiliation process, that those will merge together.
Well, the last one we did was essentially a overlay, you worked on it, as I recall.
Tom did it.
Tom did
it.
most of it, yeah.
Okay, well, it was
Tom got all-
essentially a overlay perspective on our district, and I don't think that was good enough.
It actually wasn't an overlay perspective, it was the company that Overlake hired to do their
Yeah,
community needs assessment, because that organization had already done it and it overlapped our district. It cost us a lot
It's
less
only a
to
service
ask
area.
them to provide us the information that's carved out for us. So it was for us, we got it by way of them doing theirs.
But mostly it's data collection. It's data which is gonna be the same whether you're rural or if you're a city. I mean, there's some of it that just is based on population. And the data comes out of the population information that you get.
well, I always felt that the needs of our community are quite different from the needs of Bellevue,
Correct.
and yet
I agree.
the study really focused on Bellevue, as I recall.
No, it carved us out. You may have recalled looking at overlays because we did have it in hand, but our community needs assessment did get carved out. It was just about
Remember
us
Joe
and our
Larson, I
districts.
think it was, did our first one, I think in
Yeah.
2010 to 2012 or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
a long time.
And that was strictly our community, our hospital district. What are the needs in our hospital district?
Small sample.
That it was, and it was done without the rigor that a professional organization did, and that is not a disparagement of Joe at all. I think he did an amazing job we were all kind of stumbling, trying to figure out
That was the first
what
one.
do you do, how do you even pull off a community needs
And
assessment?
how do you even
So
get the
what he pulled
data?
off was amazing.
Yeah.
So then the next one, we found a place that could offer the rigor for the process.
Okay.
Okay.
So Commissioners, I did look up the definition of rural public hospital district, and it does not include a city with a population greater than 50,000, so it's not 75,000, it's only 50. Because I keep
That's
thinking
what I
that's going to
thought.
happen. Sooner or later, we're going to have a rural public hospital district that has a city get to 50, but I haven't found any yet, and there's still 58 rural public hospital district or public hospital districts out there.
Well, in that regard, if you pull up on the online Overlake Hospital, you'll find that they have about 10 clinics around the area. And what I don't want to see happen is for us to become a feeder for Overlake Hospital.
Well, that's what the whole idea was,
That's-
is to have continuum of care.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean, that's the whole idea, that we have continuum of care. We have all of the services that we
More.
Well, we don't have
I
now.
appreciate that from the patient standpoint, but for example, if they take our acute care patients, then we're losing out.
Well, we only have one or two.
But it could be a two-way
That's-
street.
Remember,
You're
this
making
is-
my point, we only have one or two,
Yeah.
but I'd like to see us get more acute care
We might
patients.
end up having a lot more
Okay,
with it set up differently with different providers.
I just think, remember, Mr. Spikers told Astria, okay, we need some earnest money. We need $10 million earnest money to go forward. And I realized that Overlake is in a different position than Astria, and they were not very solid financially. But the fact is, we're not asking Overlake to make a specific capital commitment.
I don't think we've gotten
I don't
that
think
far.
we'll
We're not
approve
even
something
close.
that they're not going to.
All right.
I'll just say that.
Okay, so as long as
If
the
they're not gonna
finance
make a capital commitment, then
They've
we
gotta
can just
make it.
stop it right now, and I'm sure
As
that
long
they
as the
are.
finance committee has
I'm gonna say the first thing I said.
Are you leaving,
We're
David?
talking
No,
about,
but I gotta leave pretty quick here,
Okay.
so.
we're talking about the update, and I think we kind of wandered down that subject.
And so sorry I didn't finish the first statement, and that the document that you looked at is the same. There's been no changes to that.
You said that.
And so I just wanted to get you up to date on why it hasn't changed. There's been no conversations about changing it, and where Overlake is in their due diligence section.
Okay. I just wanted to stay on the subject instead of meandering out into the world.
You know, Commissioner Pollard, when you're talking about clinics out here, you know, their day goes, the clinics where you can come in and go into any clinic, they are increasing. And they don't have, there's some that have Overlake's names on them. In fact, the Overlake doctor that my children used to go to in Issaquah isn't even there. That Issaquah clinic closed down, and she's at Eastgate now. So she's closer to Overlake than she is to us, closer. So we don't use her because she's
Well,
further
that
away.
particular clinician may have moved, but they still have a operating clinic in Bellevue.
Yeah, but that's not out here.
No, I'm sorry, not Bellevue.
Issaquah.
Issaquah. They have an operating clinic in
Uh-uh.
Issaquah.
Overlake?
No.
Overlake.
Yeah, they do.
Where? Because they are not in the building they were.
They have two clinics in Issaquah. Actually, they have three clinics in Issaquah.
Okay.
So one is on, what is that, Eastlake Sammamish? You know where the Walgreens
Way
is,
around the lake.
Bartels. No, by Bartels, right
Oh,
behind Home
okay,
Depot
yes,
and
you're
Best
right,
Buy.
they do.
There's one there. There's another one in the Highlands Center, which is on Highway 900. They have some clinics in there. And then the third is a sports medicine clinic that they purchased, and I don't know exactly where that is. But it's a sports medicine clinic that was private practice, and then he was bought out. So those are at least three that are in
Yeah,
this.
I've
I
gotten
know the
services
building they were
from
in before,
them
they aren't.
down there in Issaquah.
Mhm.
But you had done medicine with their clinic also.
They're in Issaquah too.
Yeah, but they're not the same building. Yeah,
Thank you.
everybody's moving around.
Okay.
At the January work study session, if nothing else takes a higher priority for that agenda, we'll probably start the conversation about what does it look like for the board, for the district, after we've moved on to, after the affiliation occurs. So we've been focusing so much of our attention on what does the lease of the hospital look like, and I don't want to forget to pay attention to how do we manage the commissioners and the role of the commissioners and the district that remains. What does the budget look like? What is the work that still remains? Because there's still a lot of regulatory work that is still on the plate. I think we're going to keep the focus on that.
I agree, and I think we also need to remember, let's not forget the public. They're going to have confidence in this transition.
Right.
And so it's very important that we present the kind of thing they're going to accept. Otherwise, we're not going to get the patients, regardless of what name we put on the front of the building.
And I think the other part of the confidence is for you all to be able to say, and here's what the district continues to do, to be able to see what is that vision look like.
And how we are able to expand our services as a result of the affiliation.
And those will be two separate conversations,
Yeah.
because the services are happening in the hospital. There may be services that are happening that the district continues to provide, is to be able to start vision casting around what's that, which is kind of that verdant model that we hear a lot about.
Educational and so forth.
Yeah, I think that's the part that has to be explored. Is it educational? Is it different service lines that aren't being offered right now that the district would have ownership around?
Exactly.
It's really wide open fields. It won't be surgery and labor delivery, because those are hospital based, but it's what things in the community might this group want to be owners
Pursue.
around.
And this is going to require board deliberation on many topics.
It will, and I don't think it won't happen quickly.
And it won't happen
doesn't
quickly.
have to happen quickly as much as the vision starts, the casting
David
begins.
is very impatient, but if you look at the history of mergers and affiliations, we're talking 3 years for most of them. So,
Yes.
you know, if it's not done in 3 weeks, David, you must be patient.
Well, I've been trying to do this for 5 years.
Yeah.
5 years I've had this on the agenda. 2014, we all agreed that
Yeah, we
affiliation.
did.
It was September 2014, so we're 4 years in.
That's when I was.
That's true.
So we'll, if, like I said, if nothing else trumps as far as importance, we can start having a conversation about that.
Another thing is when Astria was making a proposal and so forth, we brought them in, including the CEO and the CFO and one other person, another person in finance, I think. We even had a dinner for them. Now, I would like to get to know the commissioners, or rather the trustees of Overland Hospital. We should be on a conversational basis with these guys. You know, I don't want to just be out there somewhere. I'd like to get to know them. Is that unreasonable?
They have expressed, at least Mike Marsh has expressed the same thing, so it's on both visions,
Thank you.
absolutely.
I would like to hear his vision. In
Mike
person.
Marsh's? Yes.
In person.
I
I
agree.
do too.
I agree.
I think that would
So,
be
you know, it'd be nice.
interesting to hear what he
Yeah,
thinks.
in between LOI and definitive agreement, there would be a great opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he is more than willing, he's actually looking forward to that
Okay.
opportunity, so, but he realizes it's after LOI and before definitive agreement.
Well, I'd like to do it sooner rather than later, and maybe before the LOI conversion and so forth.
Well,
I'd like to, I think we
want
should have
certain
already
stuff
done
has
it.
to already be done first.
Yeah, and I think that having the LOI in place will now give a framework for the conversation.
yeah.
Yes, Joan, do you have
I'm
something to
just
say?
saying, I think that we have moved off the topics that were listed.
I agree.
And,
No, I'm not sure.
well,
For another.
All right.
So do you have a motion?
I have a motion to end this. I don't think there's any public
oh, no, we'll
comment,
tell
so.
you we can't make motions.
Pardon?
We don't make motions.
We can't take votes.
No, you can't take action.
Can't take votes.
Oh,
To adjourn.
yeah.
No, we can
I can make a motion to
Yeah,
If
adjourn.
somebody has a motion,
I do, right now.
is there a second?
I'll second.
What is your motion, sir?
To
To
adjourn.
adjourn.
What about other and public comment?
Well, there's no public
There's
here
really
for
no
public
public.
I know,
comment.
but we gotta go through the process.
Okay, well, I'm
Well, I
gonna
think-
say that we've been talking about other half the time.
Yes, we have. I think we've
it's
done
all
enough
right.
other.
So don't be too hard on that.
And, well, no, and if you look at the bylaws, you have one comment during other.
That will take
Okay.
effect in January.
Okay, I
Everybody-
second it if it hasn't been seconded.
Let me
Okay.
say before we totally adjourn, and just for protocol, upcoming board meetings, regular meeting, business meeting will be Thursday, January 10th, 2019 at 6:30 North-South Conference Room. And the next work study will be Wednesday, January 23rd, 2019 at 6:30 in the North-South Conference Room. Now, do I hear a motion?
I have a motion to adjourn.
Second?
We vote, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That's it.
Joan seconded it ahead of me, so
All right.
recorded properly.
Good discussion, everyone. I think
Credit for-
I like it.
Yeah.